All right, Genesis chapter 3, if you will recall, in chapter 2, again, just reminding here, all of this is up here, just to help us remember we had these four things, I guess you could say, that were found in the creation account of Genesis chapter 2, and this one where he put man into the garden, and there's a great river there which split and became, remember, the four rivers. The tree of life was there, man was there, God. All of them were there together. You flip the page, and then you go to Genesis chapter 3, and what happens in Genesis 3? By the way, do we have somebody wants to run around with the mic stick? We'll let somebody grab that here. So in a very, very, very brief answer, what happens in Genesis 3? You turn the page and then what? Very good. That's about as brief as you can get. Sin, right? You turn the page and then sin. And so we have what we refer to as the fall narrative. It's often referred to that. It doesn't actually call it that in the Scripture, but that's at least how we look at it, because things are going to be different on the other side of Genesis chapter 3. So Genesis chapter 2, everything is great. And then we get into Genesis 3, and the serpent comes to the woman, and what's the very first words from the serpent? Has God really said? Is that what you said, Annalie? Something like that? Very good. Excellent. Good job, Annalie. Yeah, that's right. Did God really say, or has God really said? The very first words out of the serpent's mouth is to challenge the Word of God. Did God really say this? And in this one, did God, asked about what they can or can't eat, and she, recited back, and she says, the day that we eat of it, and she kind of adds there, or touch it, we know that we will surely die. And he goes, you won't surely die. The problem is God he knows that as soon as you eat of it, you're going to become just like him, knowing good and evil. Is that true? Yeah. We'll talk about that, I guess, probably in just a little bit. And so he kind of is putting this as this is the man trying to hold you down type of a thing. He doesn't want you to, become more knowledgeable or have this understanding. She looks at it. It looks desirable to eat, pleasing. She wants to become wise, so she eats. God comes and confronts them. You have the confrontation to the serpent. And who remembers the $5 word that we used for this one? Who's got that? For verse 15. Anybody remember the word there? It's yeah? No, not quite yet. All right, the proto-evangelion, or some people would say proto-evangelium, but it is the very first mention of the gospel message within the Scriptures. It's the first evangelion or evangelium. Remember, that is good news, evangelism, right? Gospel. So it's the very first time that the message of the gospel is given, and there in verse 15, I will put hostility between you and the woman, between your offspring, her offspring. He will strike your head, you will strike his heel. 16, where we put a lot of focus to the woman. The very first one there in verse 16, I will intensify your labor pains. You will bear children with painful effort. This is the CSB rendering of this. Your desire will be for your husband, yet he will rule over you. Now, I'm spending a lot of time trying to say that I really don't like the CSB's rendering of this, because the CSB is very much focused on what pain? and many of y'all's translations as well, probably. The physical birthing pains from this. Whereas you can make a really good argument. In fact, I think I can make a really good argument. It's going to be, 40, 50 pages long or so to demonstrate that the pain is actually an emotional suffering, grief, that is greatly multiplied. This is not talking about physical pain in childbirth. This is saying that with conception, which is the word there, with conception is going to come not just a physical pain, but now pain will be multiplied in that there's now going to be emotional suffering, grief, that's going to come with the bearing of children. That it's going to be a part of trying to have kids, it's going to be a part of the childbirth procedure, and it's going to come as you raise your kids. And as they grow up, there will now be pain, emotional sorrow and grief, which, by the way, is a better translation for this word. Sorrow is a better translation than pain. I'm with the King James on this one. They translate this as sorrow here. And that is a better translation than just saying the word pain. All right, we've talked, we don't need to rehash that. We went through all that. Your desire will be for your husband, he will rule over you. Either, remember, that's referring to the desire to rule over the husband. And we see that in parallel in chapter 4. Remember when Cain was upset? God came to him and said, hey, dude, seriously, why are you so upset? Why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, then, I'm messing up there, there in verse 6. If you do well, won't you be accepted? If you do not do what's well, sin is crouching at your door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. Same wording, same structure, same everything. What is it that sin wants to do? What's the desire that sin has for Cain? All right. Sin wants to rule over Cain. And he says, you must rule over it. God says, you must rule over it. So, same structure, perhaps that is what it is. The woman's desires to rule over the man. Instead, he will rule over her. This could also be talking about a physical desire, in that even though your conceptions are going to lead to greatly multiplied grief, you still will invite them. Your desire still will be for your husband, and he will continue to rule over you. Either one of those, I lean towards the parallel with Genesis 4 and the desire to rule over. But that then brings us into verses 17 through 19, which we were in the midst of a couple weeks ago, the last time we had our class here. And he said to the man, because you listened to your wife, ate from the tree from which I commanded you, do not eat from it. The ground is cursed because of you. You will eat from it by means of painful labor all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. You will eat bread by the sweat of your brow until you return to the ground, since you were taken from it. For you are dust, and you will return to dust. All right, so 17 through 19, we talked about... Oh, there it is. All right, we talked about how, first of all, what is cursed? All right, the ground is cursed, right? So the ground is cursed. It is interesting that neither Adam nor Eve are actually declared as cursed. The serpent is, the ground is, neither man nor woman are actually cursed here. But the ground is cursed because of you. We talked about that. You will eat from it by means of painful labor. And I would say sorrowful labor. That's the exact same word from 3:16 that talks about pain in childbirth. It's the exact same word that's used right there. It will produce thorns and thistles. So, it will produce thorns and thistles, and you will eat the plants of the field. And now, this is about where we left off, verse 19. He says, you will eat what? All right. You will eat bread. And we started to get into this. We ran out of time a couple weeks ago. What's the significance of that? You will eat bread. Yeah, well, hold on, Cliff. Give Mike just a second. He's coming. All right, what you got, Cliff?
Yeah, they will eat bread, I think refers to the fact that before, when they were in the garden, they had everything supplied to them by God. God gave them what they needed to survive. And now they'll have to eat bread. They have to not only eat the bread, they have to grow the wheat, they have to grind the wheat, they have to, make the dough, cook it, and all that kind of stuff. So there's labor involved.
Yeah.
But I do have a question for you.
Okay.
It says in my translation, cursed is the ground for your sake.
Uh-huh.
Can you explain that to me? Because for your sake means something different to me than maybe what I'm reading here.
Okay. Without digging, just going back and looking, because it would take me, I'm not so good with my Hebrew that I can just at a glance kind of, look through it. I'm pretty sure, though, it's the impression because of you. Yeah. And so because of you and what you've done, God says, I'm not cursing you, but I am cursing the ground. And that's going to affect you in this negative way. Go ahead, Jeff. Jeff's got some insights. He's got the answer that I'm not coming up with.
American Standard, it uses exactly those words. So it's because of you, and New American Standard is how it's translated.
Yeah, and that's what CSB does here as well, the Christian Standard Bible. It also says, because of you. The ground is cursed because of you. Yeah, Kelly.
Back to your question about the bread, is that any type of parallel looking forward to how Jesus is the bread of life?
Oh, could be. Could be, because you see an awful lot of those types of connections that are really important. I believe this is the first time that the word bread is used. This is really, I need to look and make sure that it's very specifically bread and not just the generic word for food. If you will bear with me, I'm really sorry. Let's see here. Because that is a really important point. Yeah, it is very. It is, yes. The same word that is usually translated as bread. The word lahem is the word which. What word do you all know that has lahem in it? Bethlehem. What does Bethlehem mean? All right, the house of bread. Yeah, literally, Beit means house, so it's the house of bread is Bethlehem. which is the origination of the bread of life. It's not a coincidence, right? There aren't a whole lot of coincidences. And the very first time that you see this word pop up here is in these curses, and Jesus is ultimately going to be the one who reverses all of these things. So, that's great, Kelly. Very, very astute. Appreciate you bringing that out, that idea. It says, "You will eat bread by the sweat of your brow until you return to the ground." Going back to what Cliff was talking about, the idea of bread, and we talked about this a little bit. I think this is where we ended. Just how much goes into making bread compared to what they had in the garden. Remember when we said it was a garden? I mean, yes, that's the word that's used, but it's kind of more like a what? It's kind of more like an orchard. It's not a garden where they have to go out and cultivate, the rows and do the planting and the watering and the weeding. And God causes all the growth to take place. And when he tells him that he needs to cultivate it and keep it, there's not an awful lot of work that goes into Adam actually doing that. Things are going to be different now from what they were before. And he says, now you're going to eat bread. You're going to have to work to sustain yourself. A lot of process, as Cliff was going through, goes into the production of bread, where you have to actually grow the grains and then, harvest and separate out the grains from the chaff. And then you have to actually grind it and bake it. By the way, bake it, that's a word I couldn't come up with last time. For those of you who were, I was like, just spread it or whatever. Yeah, Connie?
Would it be fair to assume then that thistles and thorns did not exist prior to this?
I go back and forth on that one. I don't have a problem with thorns and thistles existing, but they weren't something that was in Adam's way, if that makes sense. It wasn't something that he had to worry about in order to take care of his family. Now, thorns and thistles are going to be in the way. Whether they existed before, didn't exist before, if they're absolutely brand new, or whatever the case, is not as important as understanding this is a reality that as you, as a husband, as a father, are trying to take care of your family, there are going to be barriers in the way that are going to keep you from adequately doing that. That's what the thorns and the thistles kind of represent, the barriers that fight against you because we now live in a sinful world. And he says, it's a good question, though. I'm not taking away from that at all. It's a very good question. He says, until you return to the ground. What does that mean? Until you return to the ground. All right, until you die is what he's talking about here. Since you were taken from it, what does that mean? You were taken from it. All right, in creation itself, John talked about this. When we were looking at this before, that Adam came from the ground, right? I mean, it's a play on words. We don't need to go into all that. Anyway, he was formed from the dust of the ground, basically, and the curse is he will return to the dust of the ground. You are dust to dust, and you will return to dust. What is that? Returning to dust. Yeah. Okay, death? Yes, very good. So, death is what brings about the beginning portions of, after you die, what happens to you? Yeah, death, and then you have the decay process, right? Who can tell me about Jewish burial customs? I know you guys have talked about those before, right? Mike, you want to inform us of Jewish burial customs? I'm putting you on the spot here.
Well, my understanding is they dressed the body up, cleaned it, laid it out, and then left it until it was bones. Then they collected all the bones and put it in a box called a ossuary. Mm-hmm. And then the box went in the family plot.
Yeah, very good. So the idea, they were going to seal up the tomb, right? They did this for Lazarus, where he'd been in the tomb for how many days? All right, it was the fourth day. He'd been dead for 4 days, and Jesus said to open the tomb, and what'd Martha say? It's like, yeah, you don't want to do that. I'm all for you, Jesus. I'm with you. I believe in you. I believe that had you been here, my brother would not have died. But you don't want to open that tomb because it's gross. Decay has set in on the fourth day. Decay has begun at this point. Remember, did they know about microbiology or anything like? No. To them, you hit what's called the bloat stage, right, on the fourth day, and that was done. That's when it is, and they would just let it go for about a year. And then you come back, you collect the bones. After allowing the body to return to dust, you collect the bones, put them in the box, store the box in the second compartment of the tomb in the back, and you move on with your life, having now finally fully buried the dead. To many Jewish people, that was part of the price of sin. That's what you paid for. Your body decays because of sin. In fact, there were some rabbis who even suggested that paid the penalty for sin, so that your sinfulness is taken away after your body has undergone that decay. Again, I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just saying some people saw it that way. But it's a reality. With death comes decay. Your body returns to dust. All of these that we've been looking at really fall under a discussion. I held it off until now. We've already talked about it. But as far as a reminder review, how you view these depends on if you see these punishments as what? What two words? Anybody remember what our two words were? Jan threw one out earlier. Yeah, whether you see these as prescriptive or descriptive. What's the difference between prescriptive or descriptive? Okay, I'm with you on descriptive. Prescriptive, though. Do that again. Okay, we're gonna play with that one just a little bit. We're gonna tweak it just a little bit. Kelly?
I was just going to say, like a prescription that a doctor gives you. They're telling you what's going to happen. This is how it's going to be.
Okay. All right. Which is what Josie was saying. I didn't verify that back. Sorry for those of you who weren't able to hear. But telling what is going to happen, is that what you said for prescriptive, descriptive? Telling what has happened. And so also Kelly, says the same type of thing. Yeah, the question is, are these punishments that God is now changing things and saying, because you did this, I'm now going to change things, and this is the way it's going to be from now on. As in, this is your punishment. And I'm going to zap it all differently. That is prescriptive, saying, well, from now on, this is the way I'm doing it. Or is it descriptive, saying, now that sin has entered into the world, this is your new reality. It's not as if God is sitting there saying, all right, zap, zap, zap. It's more like God is saying, this is the way it's going to be from now on. He is taking himself away. He's going to separate himself from mankind. And there's going to be a cherubim that stands there with the flaming sword saying, you're not allowed to come in here anymore. That's going to be a reality. Now that, we'll just look with the woman. Now the pain is going to be increased, not because God is changing the anatomy of a woman in any way, shape, or form to make it more physically painful, but now sin is in the world. And because sin is in the world, a woman who would have had a perfectly beautiful child, who would have grown into a perfect person, is now instead going to have a child who's going to sin, who's going to hurt her in some kind of a way. Or there's now other issues, other problems, other grief and sorrows that are going to be a part of this on an emotional basis that she wouldn't have had before. Marriage, relationship is going to be different. Now that sin has entered into the world, the husband is going to make sinful decisions. And when a husband makes sinful decisions that are, quite frankly, sometimes kind of dumb, how easy is it for a woman to follow those sinful decisions? Did I drone too much and you guys just lost the whole train of thought of what I was saying? Let me try it again. In the marriage relationship, if a husband, because of sin in the world, makes sinful decisions that are dumb, is it easy for a woman who recognizes how sinful those decisions are, is it easy for her to follow that? Yeah. No. What? Who said yeah? Oh, okay. Nice try, though. I'll give you, honestly, you had a 50% shot. So I'm just glad you just went out there, guns blazing right there. Yeah, I love the confidence, though. But think about it. If you've been around people who are making really bad decisions, do you want to follow them in those bad decisions? No, you don't. You can do it better yourself, right? Which is why women, I think, would want to be the heads of the household. They can do it better, but they're not able to. That's the reality that's now come into effect. Yeah, Cliff?
Well, the way you kind of posed the question was, is it easy for the woman to, follow the man, even if he is stupid and does stupid things, okay?
Yeah.
And it is, actually, because there's an excuse there. He's the head of the household. He's the one that I'm supposed to be, be in submission to. So if he's making this decision, then, hey, that gives me, maybe she wants to do that. Who knows? But it does make it easier. But should she? No, she shouldn't.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with you, Cliff. I think it's a very, very hard thing when you know what's right. What's that? Oh, okay. Yeah. Cliff said, you should agree with me. If you have to abide by someone that you know is just absolutely wrong and taking you down the wrong path that you don't want to go down, Mike, we got a hand over here. Then I think it would be a very difficult thing to just say, you know what? Is it fair? Whatever. I don't have anything to do with it. I think it would be very difficult. Serena?
Having been in that situation a long time ago. It's not easy to follow because you know you know what's going to happen, and you don't really want to be on a train wreck. But it's a situation where you're kind of on the train wreck.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot that you can do. But you don't really want to be the head of the household either, because that's a lot of responsibility. And having ended up being the head of the household after everything blew up in my life, yeah, I didn't want that job either, and I ended up with it, and it was way too much at times. So I have a lot of empathy with the husbands because they've got a lot of responsibility,
Yeah.
and it's a big job. But I also have a lot of empathy with the women, because sometimes you just want to shake them and say, "Would you please open your eyes?" You know. So there's, yeah, I see it both ways.
Yeah.
But it's a tough role for either of the spouses.
Now, and I am being very shallow level with this discussion. I mean, if we really wanted to dig into it, we could go layers upon layers, you know, of going into marriages, and there's never a single wrong person in a marriage relationship. You know, there have been problems on both people, on both sides. You're talking about sinful people who are trying to do their best, hopefully. You know, at the very best, you have two people who are trying to do their best. They're just flawed, and it goes on both ways. So I recognize that. Just work with me on this, that we are being relatively shallow. We're not dealing with all the caveats, exceptions, you know, trying to dig into all the layers, because quite frankly, the Bible doesn't do that a lot. It usually paints the picture, and then it says, okay, now that you've got the general picture, take what you need and you go deeper with it. You go more deeply down and figure out all the other levels and everything else, and you put the more work into it, which is what this discussion would entail probably if we were bringing this up in a marriage class, you know, type of discussion, or even a parenting class or a relationship class, or something such as that. Good discussion, though. I don't want to get ourselves going backwards and getting bogged down again in this discussion. All of this, though, to say, I think it makes a ton more sense to see, even though the wording itself is, "I will do this," that the effect of it is really not just God prescriptively zapping things and making them different, but God is now explaining, this is the way it's going to be now. It's going to be different. Sin is in the world. Things are naturally going to change, and they're not going to change for the better. So, go to verse 22. The Lord God said, since the man has what? What are y'all's translations? All right, since the man has become like one of us, in what way? Since the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. All right, so we'll talk about that in just a second. He must not reach out, take from the tree of life, eat, and live forever. The CSB is a lot more definitive there than, say, like the ESV or the NASB, or the ones that leave the, leave the statement kind of nebulous, lest he take out, reach out his hand and eat and live forever. Let's talk about this first phrase. Does this sound familiar, since the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil? Verse 5, Josie says, verse 5, I wonder what verse 5 has to say. Let's go back and take a look at it. Let's see. Verse 4, "No, you will not die," the serpent said to the woman. "In fact, God knows that when you eat it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Wait a second. I thought the serpent lied to them. Yeah, Kathy?
Told a half-truth. They do know good from evil, but the dying part, he told a lie about.
I'm sorry, what did he tell a lie about?
About the first part, that you will not die.
Really? Did they die?
Not physically, immediately.
Yeah, I mean, they don't die, right?
No.
Does God zap them dead? No. Do they become like God? Well, what does God himself say? Yeah, God says they've become like us in the exact way that the serpent promised. They became like God, knowing good and evil. God himself says, look, this is reality now. They've become like us, knowing good and evil. So, they don't die right away. In fact, what should have been their punishment? Immediate death. I mean, consider for just a second, what could God have simply done at this point? Ooh, he will do that, though. Annalise said, save them. Yeah, we're going to see that. I like what Connie said, though. Say it louder for the people in the back. Start it over. How hard right now would it be to start over? It's just a matter of like, I've got these two. Y'all blew it. We're done with you. Let's get our next contestants down here for the Garden of Eden, right? I mean, that's all it would have taken, is just push them off to the side. Let's just dig in the dirt a little bit, get two more people here. Let's start it back up, and away we go, right? Wouldn't that have been a whole lot easier? Depends on the perspective. All right. Mike, bring your mic up here. I want to know what perspective we're depending upon here.
Well, God had the choice of what he wanted to do. He'd already made what he wanted. He'd already put in place what he wanted. Man made the choice of sinning against what God had said to do. So the perspective could be that I don't want to do all this over again, and I want to just go with what we've got. But, I mean, my belief is that he knew from time beginning, before time began, what was going to happen. And he just went with what was going on at that point.
What stays his hand, do you think?
Love.
Say that again?
Love.
Yeah. How many of y'all have had a kid? Couple of you? Right? Couple of you a couple times, right? How many of y'all have had a kid that just a little tiny little thing and you kind of hold it up and it's so precious and beautiful and you can smell it and you go in to smell it and then it barfs all in your face? Anybody? Yeah? Okay, come on. Or maybe if you have one of the male types and you don't get that little cloth on there quickly enough when you're changing a diaper, right? And it's spraying all over the place. I see the nods. Y'all know what I'm talking about. And the mess is made, the problem's made, all kinds of things. How many of y'all are tempted to say, well, forget this one. This one's just messed up. I'm going to do another one. What stays your hand? It's love, right? God has a relationship with Adam and Eve. Just forget us today and every human who's ever existed and everything. God has such a relationship with just these two that at the very beginning, when it would have been so easy to say, y'all messed this up, forget it, let's put you in the scrapyard and let's start all over with. It would have been so easy at that point to do that. But it's like it never even crosses his mind. In fact, as Anna Lee pointed out a few minutes ago, he does the exact opposite. Instead of giving them what they deserve, all of these things that we're talking about, this is a mitigated punishment or judgment of sorts. This is not this is what you deserve. This is God saying, I feel awful. I can't remember. Kelly Hafer described it in a really good way. I can't remember the word he used. I don't know if it was disappointment or something when we had this discussion about prescriptive, descriptive. But you can, I'm going to use the word disappointment. You can almost see the disappointment on a father's face who's like, this hurts because now I know what you're going to be dealing with. And it's not what I wanted for you. But I'm going to be there to help. In fact, why is it? Okay, hold on. If you want to come up for Lorraine here in just a second. Yeah, go ahead, Lorraine. What's your...
Kelly said our Heavenly Father had to watch his children sin. And then Adam and Eve in Genesis 4 will watch Cain sin. Yeah, and that's huge, is that comparison over just one chapter. That the perfect children, Adam and Eve, they now sin. And they go into there, and you see the Father watching that. What is the ultimate curse from Genesis chapter 3? I say curse. The word curse isn't used there, but what is the ultimate judgment? Separation. Okay. Did you say that where they could hear you?
Separation.
Okay. Separation. Because he said, lest they do what? All right. Lest they take from the tree of life, eat, and live forever. What does he do? The Lord God sent him away from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he was taken. He drove the man out, stationed the cherubim, the flaming, whirling sword, east of the Garden of Eden to guard the way to the tree of life. Why does he do that? Say that again, Cliff.
So they don't live forever.
Why? What's wrong with them living forever?
Well, they could sin forever, but like God lives forever. I mean, they're going to be like God, and they will live for eternity, I suppose.
Okay. When God originally placed them in the garden, was the access to the tree of life there? Yes. Were they forbidden from eating that? No. The only tree they were forbidden from eating was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They had access to the tree of life. The intention, apparently, was that they would eat of that and do what? Live forever. So what's different now? Why does God separate them? Mike?
Living forever in separation from God we call hell.
Yeah. Consider that for just a second. Is not kicking them out of the garden, separating them from the tree of life, is that not actually the most gracious act that God does in Genesis chapter 3? How many of y'all have known somebody who was old? And I'm not even talking like Dale and Mike old. I'm talking old. The type of person that, you're around them and you can just tell. In fact, they may tell you, I've lived enough life. I don't want to live this life anymore. I'm ready to go. Anybody ever been around anybody like that? And you're living a life in which your body's undergoing decay, whether you're dead or not. The process, everything, it's a process. We grow old and this body breaks down. You're going through that. The sin in the world, the problems in the world, everything that's taking place. How many of y'all would want to live forever in that kind of a horrific state? This is the grace that God gives by blocking the way to the tree of life. He says this is their new reality, a sinful reality. They're no longer going to be in a place where He wants them to eat from the tree of life, because then they would live forever in a sinful state, in a state of decay, in a state of their body breaking down, in a state of everything else that's just horrific in life, all of those things. This is the grace of God that separates them from that. But it's not the end of the story. We're going to move away from Genesis 3. Anybody else have anything that you want to say on Genesis 3 before we move away from Genesis 3? Yeah, we've got a couple hands up here, so give just a second. Go ahead, Fred.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. Satan wants death. He didn't lead them to the tree of life. He led them to the one that led to death.
Yes.
For future generations. And the other thing that's interesting is Adam and Eve lived a long life. Mm-hmm. They were like, when they died, there were 2 more generations before the flood.
Yeah.
They knew Methuselah, who died at the flood.
Yep.
They were around a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to remember that a lot of these early generations, and I think a lot of that had to do with being able to multiply and fill the earth, and the longevity that was needed in order to do that before the flood. Obviously, after the flood, it kind of decreases very, very quickly. But it is something that if we follow just the numbers there in the genealogy from chapter 5, it is really interesting how close Adam and Eve are to the flood itself. Yeah, Cliff.
This is not an observation, but just a question on the prescriptiveness of what they have to endure, basically because of the consequences of their actions, including being removed from the tree of life and including being removed from the garden. Why the discussion between Christ and the Father? Why the discussion, or between all 3 of them?
You talking about like in John 17? Or?
Am I not being...
The discussion. Oh, you mean...
it's a discussion between God.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. I think that's...
We're going to...
I think that's for the sake of the narrative.
Okay. Well, yeah, okay.
We need to know that information. And so the way it is written in such a way to give us the pertinent information that we need to know what's going on in the mind of God. It's not like they, I don't think, needed to discuss among themselves, but we needed to know. Yeah, because it's written in that way. It's written in the way for the Israelites to understand God, their Creator. I mean, that's what all of this is written in a way to understand all of these aspects. All right, very quickly, I want to go to the end. There are people out there who, when they are picking up a new book, they like to go to the last couple pages and read those so that they know if the book has a good ending, if it's worth reading. Yeah. Any of you all know anybody who does that? Yeah, that's just the worst. I'm just going to throw it out there just just know what the ending is right there. But people do it. Well, all right, let's do that now. Let's go to Revelation chapter 22, and we're going to conclude by looking at what we find in Revelation chapter 22. This is a picture, I believe, as I understand this. It's a future-looking picture of the idea of what heaven's going to be. The New Jerusalem has come down out of heaven, and it comes down. And you have that picture that's beautiful, the streets of gold, the gates carved out of pearls, and all of that in chapter 21. Notice, though, in chapter 22, starting in verse 1, he showed me the river of the water of life, clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb down the middle of the city's main street. The tree of life was on each side of the river, bearing 12 kinds of fruit, producing its fruit every month. The leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations, and there will no longer be any curse. The throne of God and of the Lamb will be in the city, and his servants will worship him. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads. Night will be no more. People will not need the light of a lamp or the light of the sun, because the Lord God will give them light, and they will reign forever and ever. Now, normally, I'm getting to this in the exact, this is all just one lesson when I sit down with someone, just so you all know. Everything that we've done up till now is usually done in about an hour or so time frame. So we're digging in a whole lot more deeply than what I typically do when I sit down with someone. But did anybody notice anything? In fact, there are 4 things here that I want you to see from Revelation 22. What are those 4 things? Does anybody know? All right, you have a great river, right? What else? The tree of life. Who's there? Man is there and God is there. Does that look familiar to anybody? Yeah. Wait a second. Man is there with the tree of life? But I thought man was separated from the tree of life. I thought Genesis 3 made it to where man couldn't be with the tree of life. Man couldn't be with God. None of these things are here, and yet every one of these components from Genesis chapter 2 have found themselves over in Revelation chapter 22. How is it that in Genesis chapter 3, man separated himself and made it to where he could not stand in the presence of God, and yet we get here to Revelation chapter 22, and man is in the presence of God with the tree of life, and there is no curse? That is what all of this is about. This is a story. It's the greatest story ever told. It's the most beautiful love story ever put together. And it's the story that invites you to be a part of it. Is that something you'd like to study? I hope that it is. That is the first lesson that I typically go through when I go through and I study with someone, with a lot less of the Genesis 3 discussion. All right, we are out of time. Are there any other comments or questions? All right, very good.